The Capitals have got a look at quite a few different players from Hershey this year. When will it be Ethen Frank's turn under the big lights? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Capitals have not had the season that they were looking for, and there has been injuries. So the Capitals have had the opportunity to get a look at quite a few different players from Hershey this year. We take a look at Pierre Dubé. We take a look at Scarbosa. We take a look at Hendrik Slop here. Just off the top of my head, Hunter Shepard in there. But when will it be Ethen Frank's turn to get his shot under the big lights? We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about his need for speed. Yes, he is even a faster skater than Connor McDavid himself. What are the Capitals waiting for? We'll talk about that a little bit later. We will talk about what he meant for the Capitals or the Hershey Bears push for the Calder Cup last season and how he figures to help them this season. And then I will talk about his origin story or his history. But just to get it going here, talking about Ethen Frank, when will we see him? When it was during Evgeny Kuznetsov, when they announced that he was being waived, Brian McClellan, GM of the Capitals, was asked about Ethen Frank, and he said that it should be soon, that we should try to get a look at him here soon, but he's just making his way back from injury. But he is back. He's playing in Hershey. And I think that, a lot will be determined on what happens on this West Coast, primarily Canadian trip. If the Capitals do really well, then maybe that we won't get a look at him this season. I mean, if everything's going really well, why shake it up? You may as well not try to fix something that isn't broke. However, if the Capitals fail, say they drop a bunch of games on this current trip and the perception is that they are out of it, then I think the Capitals will take a look and see what they have in Ethen Frank, because at the end of the day, he is going to be a restricted free agent at the end of the season. And I think the Capitals need to, come to terms with what they have in Ethen Frank. Taking a look at him, he is a right shot center. And one of the things is, and I don't know necessarily where he would fit in, but I think that he would at least be worth a look to see what he has. To see if he has any chemistry out there. And again, a lot of this would be determined if he gets any playing time, is that if there's any sort of injury or say the Capitals totally fall off, they should at least take a look, in my estimation, at what kind of player he would be under the big lights. And the 23-24 season, in 49 games, 21 goals, in 14 assists. It would be much higher, even though, because he missed a decent amount of time based to injury. Talking about what he did last season in the Calder Cup in 16 games, 2 goals, 14 assists. There was also him getting scratched in the playoffs. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then last season in the 22-23 season, in 57 games, 30 goals, 19 assists. Pretty good for a guy that is playing down in Hershey in the AHL Would that translate to the Capitals? I guess we won't know until we try it out. I think that the Capitals overall this season have been pretty lucky with the guys that they've called up. The only guy that didn't really light it up as much as I had hoped he would was Pierre Dubé, being that he knocks it out of the park in the AHL. Now, in all fairness, he was given a fairly small sample size, but I think that, I would like a longer look at him at some point, if not this season, next season. But in particular, in this episode, we are going to talk about Ethen Frank and taking a look at his contract. Ethen Frank's salary is $775,000 and his cap hit is $775,000 for the 23-24 season. He is 26-year-old center who was born on February 5th, 1998. He has signed a one-year contract worth a total value of $775,000. He will be a restricted free agent at the end of the 23-24 season when he is 26 years old. Again, I think they need to come to terms with what they want to do with him. I think that he is at least worth a look, given the fact that we are at that juncture of the season. And are we in it? Are we out of it? Are we in it? Are we out of it? That's why, in my estimation, a lot will be determined on this road trip as to what kind of players are going to be here. What do we know? That Mantha got shipped out, Kuznetsov, those kind of things. So it does present an opportunity for some of these young guys to get an opportunity. I think that now would be the perfect time for a guy like Ethen Frank to get a look and see what he has in the tank there. But talking about his slow start, and that was one of the things this season is that he didn't, set the world on fire right away. So there was some question, and I think that there is, at least to a certain extent, some apprehension about what kind of player he is. We know he's fast. We know he can score goals in the AHL, but would that translate to the NHL? Frank had a slow start to the 23-24 season for a player of his caliber, only scoring 5 goals for 8 points in his first 14 games this season. He went goalless in 11 of those games. And in that time frame, he had 6-game goalless streak. Frank then caught fire in December, scoring a hat trick in a 5-2 victory over the Checkers and notching 6 goals in a 6-game stretch in January. So the thing that's a bit interesting that, kind of really reading into Ethen Frank a little bit more in depth is that he is really kind of prone to being hot and cold. And a little bit later in the show, I will talk about how he was actually scratched by the head coach of the Hershey Bears based on his play. So there's a lot of things to consider. Now, it's interesting. And when I hear people say, I heard Alex Ovechkin blame his equipment, that, I don't really buy it that much. But, the more and more I hear about it, I think maybe that there is a little bit of substance to what they're talking about. He linked his struggle with his change from CCM to Bauer. He says, I've always used Bauer, Frank said. Can't remember any piece of equipment that my parents have bought me that was CCM. And he did have success switching stick companies. And you also saw that with Alex Ovechkin. So I guess despite my thoughts on it, that there is a whole lot more to it than meets the eye. Frank was originally talking about how he's playing this year, and I think that he's playing pretty good, all things considered. I think that we need to see more from him. But on the big team, the Capitals, I would like to see what he has in the tank on the big team. But one of the things that we know for sure about him is that he is a fast guy, and the data out there is that he's actually faster than some of the best players in the NHL. The Hershey Bears forward Ethen Frank once again won the CCM Fastest Skater event, claiming the victory at the 2024 AHL All-Star Skills Competition on Sunday night during the All-Star game there at Tech CU Arena in San Jose, California. This is the second straight year he has won the event. Ethen Frank wins the fastest skater contest and kind of surprises a lot of people. And I don't think that, you can fully appreciate it unless you see it in person. He is very, very fast. He's won the honor 2 years in a row. Frank took the top spot after recording a time of 13.032 seconds Frank's time was the second quickest in AHL history. Frank is the only player in the league in the history to break the 13-second barrier in event history. To put it into perspective, his skating was faster than some of the best, including Connor McDavid, Matthew Barzal, and Quinn Hughes. So what is one of the things that we talk about on the show that the Capitals need to get younger and faster? Well, they got younger this season. They would be a whole lot faster with a guy like Ethen Frank on the roster. One of the comments he made on it is, he says, I think the cones may have been a little deeper and a little farther outside the dots this year. Frank said, nah, I'm just kidding. Um, but talking about, the kind of player he is and why the Capitals should ultimately take a look at him is he can score goals in the AHL. He is very fast. There are some questions, of course, associated with him. But all things considered, I think that he's worth a look. He is going to be a restricted free agent at the end of the year. But I still think that they need to determine what they have in him. Is there a future for him on the Capitals, or should they just view him as an asset that isn't going to fit in their master plans and move on from him and get some kind of return? That is the question. All right, so coming up here after the break, one of the things that is concerning about him is that his injury this season. And then later we will talk about how huge he was in the Hershey Bears of winning the Calder Cup last season. I'll discuss coming up. We're past the halfway point of the season. It's almost the end of the season, and regardless of where the Capitals are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Listen, before Sleeper, I was not the kind of guy that was really into fantasy sports. I just wasn't. But now that I found Sleeper, let me tell you, I love it. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Capitals fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophies, also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Ethen Frank is one of the guys that I've talked about on the show. If you are an everydayer of the show, you know I've spoke about that there are certain players that I think the Capitals should take a look at. And all of them have been looked at except for Ethen Frank. We take a look. Pierre Dubé, he got his look. All things considered, I thought that, he didn't get a big enough sample size, but he didn't really light up the score sheet. Okay, I'm just going to be honest there. Then we'll talk about Mike Scarbosa. I think that he is a huge piece, and he's more than just a look. I think that he has found his way onto the roster. So really great. And then talking about Ethen Frank and why. Why does Dan want to take a look at Ethen Frank? Well, the guy can really score goals when he's dialed in, and he's super fast. What's not to love? But there is some cause of concern, and ultimately one of the things that has stymied his growth and probably why the Capitals did not take a look at him is that he was injured. Frank was originally hurt on February 9th against the Providence Bruins after colliding with the goal frame. he's doing all right. And Capitals head coach Spencer Carberry said before Frank's injury, I know it hasn't resulted in a call-up yet, and I don't know when or if that happens or comes to fruition, but the thing he's doing right now aren't going unnoticed. So he is on the Capitals' radar. He is on Brian McClellan's radar. They know that he's knocking at the door saying, let me in. It's my opportunity to shine. What do I got to do? I mean, I'm just killing it at the All-Star game. What do I need to prove to you? And I think that it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen at the end of this season, it will happen next season, depending on, I guess, what the Capitals do in the offseason. But it does appear that finally there is a mandate for this team to get younger. But talking about, how clutch he was last season and playing in the Calder Cup push there, but he did have some struggles. But when he was dialed in, he was really, really huge. He was a healthy scratch during the Calder Cup push there. Rookie winger Ethen Frank had a rough start to the postseason, going his first 11 postseason games without scoring. To put that in perspective, Frank's longest goalless drought in the regular season was 4 games, which he did only twice. So that's my cause of concern, as he does seem to be a bit prone to being hot and cold. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not, in love with those kind of players. Evgeny Kuznetsov was one of those kind of players that was prone to being hot and cold. And I'm not talking about, a game here or a game there. I'm talking about a pretty lengthy goalless drought. Frank struggled to score in the postseason. It's something that had normally come easy to him. But Frank was clutch in the Calder Cup when the Bears needed him the most. 13:24 into the first period of Game 3, Frank beat Decord with a shot from the left circle on the Bears' first power play of the night, and Giants center went bonkers. Taking a look at how huge of a role he is, and if you did watch the footage, when he is dialed in, he is quite a dynamic player. And I don't want to get into too much where he would fit into the Capitals' current roster. Listen, if he plays good enough, they'll find a way to get him in there. Someone might have to move to a wing, this or that. If he is all that he is perceived to be, I think that he will fit in just fine. I think just getting that first goal, and from where it was from, Ethen Frank, that hasn't scored in a long time, was huge for us, giving us the confidence. Bears head coach Todd Nelson said in the media room, and it was quite something. And, just to talk about the other players that were involved in the Calder Cup push last season, a lot of those guys went into the Calder Cup as boys and left as men, because a lot of those guys had opportunities, whether it be on the Hershey Bears or the Capitals. Listen, if we want to talk briefly here about Hendrix Lapierre, he's had his opportunity on the Capitals. Why is it this season that he's sticking around and he's playing really well? Same goes for Connor McMichael. Same goes for Beck Malenstein. And it's too early to say about even Mirshnyshenko, and that's not a total accurate comparison just based on where he was playing. But just talking about the young talent and how the Calder Cup really kind of shaped them into what kind of players they are this season. Frank ended that night with 3 shots and tallied his first career multi-point game in the postseason. Frank's about face came after Nelson's healthy scratched him 4 different times, including Game 1 of the Calder Cup finals. He was definitely sending a shot across Ethen Frank's bow to say, get it together. You're not getting it done. Coach Todd Nelson said he was scratched Frank to help reset his player that was obviously frustrated. The Bears had a deep roster, so there was really no concern, as we know that the Hershey Bears went on to win the Calder Cup. But that is the pedigree. That is the kind of player he is. And ultimately, I think why I would like to see him get a look on the team and, to see if he's worth it. Should we invest more time? Should he get signed to a new deal? Or is there not a spot for him on the roster? I think, the Capitals, for the first time in a long time, are making good on integrating young players. I don't want to blame Peter Laviolette exclusively, but he was not necessarily in love with the young talent on the team. But the mandate changed this season that the Capitals wanted to make a push into the playoffs and, dare I say, a Stanley Cup, but also to bring along the youth. And they did that, at least bringing along the youth, as Connor McMichael has an everyday role on the Capitals. Hendricks Lapierre is working in that direction. Scarbosa is working in that direction. Malenstein is a steady Eddie for the Capitals. So this integration of youth is something that's finally happening, and it's good, because otherwise these players just kind of toil for years and years on end. Down in Hershey, and you don't know what they have. Their contract comes up and they get traded, for some rental or something stupid like that. That I think that now is the season, and maybe next season, I guess I'm going to say, that we need to bring along more. I think that ultimately in the offseason, you're going to get a look that, potentially Charlie Lindgren could get sent out either at the draft or during free agency. And that's going to open the door for a guy like Clay Stevenson. So the same thing goes for Ethen Frank, that the Capitals need to do at least their due diligence and take a look at him, see what he has under the big lights. I understand he played with the Capitals in preseason and all that, but I'm talking under the big lights of the NHL, where you're taking on premier NHL talent. That is my hope. I think it's going to happen depending on, like I talked about in the show, what happens on this West Coast trip. But say for some reason the Capitals don't live up to expectation, I do think the Capitals will come knocking for Ethen Frank. All right, so coming up here after the break, what is the history? What's the origin story of Ethen Frank? I'll discuss coming up. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the game to the tourney. And let me tell you something, guys. If you're watching one of these games and you're not that into it, open the FanDuel app, and all of a sudden, March Madness gets that much more exciting. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in today's episode, we are talking about Ethen Frank. I've railed and talked about him all season, that it is the Capitals need to at least take a look at him, see what he has on the big stage. And why not now? We know that Mantha, Edmondson, Kuznetsov, they're not here. I know that the Capitals are still in it, sort of in that flux area of, are they in it? Are they out of it? It's really hard to know from one moment to the next. You take a look at the Capitals against the Penguins and the Blackhawks, winners. You take a look at them against the Jets. Was it just a mirage? I guess we don't know. But talking about Ethen Frank and what his history is, and where he comes from, because sometimes these guys just shoot directly from college, and they get drafted and right into the professional hockey, whether it be the AHL or NHL or ECHL, I guess, for that matter. But taking a look at him, it was a bit of a different path. His start was at Western Michigan. Frank played at Western Michigan from 2017 to 2022. Across 5 seasons and 158 games played, he scored 70 goals and 48 assists. So that is something that historically has been one of his things, is that he is a goal scorer. He's knocked it out of the park at every level thus far. Before attending Western Michigan, Frank played 2 full seasons in the USHL for the Lincoln Stars. There he scored 28 goals and 34 assists in 106 games. So taking a look at what kind of player he was, an undrafted player that, got his start playing for Western Michigan, and he got the eyes of the player development and in the Capitals organization, and got just put in that direction. And all things considered, I think he has been a really solid contributor for the Bears. Again, we don't know what he's going to do for the Capitals, but say there is not a spot for him on the big team, we know that at minimum, he's going to help the Hershey Bears in their pursuit of winning another Calder Cup. And there's nothing out there that makes me think that they're not going to be able to do that. I think that the Hershey Bears have got that much better now that they have Pierre Dubé back, and now that Ethen Frank is back. I think that things are going in the right direction. So it's interesting. And, you take a look at the Hershey Bears. They were pretty psyched to have Evgeny Kuznetsov, and he didn't even play it in one game. I think, what did he get, 1 or 2 practices in, and then he got traded. Crazily enough, it's almost like he kind of knew it. But talking about the Bears, talking about Ethen Frank, that's my hope that, in fact, he does get a look. He is a guy that kind of started at square one and worked his way up as an undrafted player, but has killed it at every single stop along the way. And it would be something if he was able to do that under the big lights. The Capitals don't necessarily need to go outside of the organization, maybe if they have a premier talent within the organization. GM Brian McClellan said as much as that, I want to find that premier center for Alex Ovechkin, but he said that Connor McMichael's doing a pretty good job. And, you take a look at the other players on the team, they're doing a pretty good job as well. And so I don't think that we should be so quick to say, well, we need to go outside of the organization when we don't really know fully what we have within the organization, especially if we have not given some of these players, i.e. Ethen Frank, his opportunity. So that is my mandate. That is something that I would like to push up to Brian McClellan, that somehow, some way, I want to see get a look at what he has on the big team and see if there's any chemistry. It could be a total bust. Listen, I was banging the drum for Pierre Dubé. Again, he didn't fall on his face, but he didn't exactly set the world on fire either. But then it's at least one of the things that that you can cross off and go, okay, well, at least I know now, because there are players that sometimes surprise you. You take a look at even Miroshnichenko, for example. He was one of the biggest contributors in the Capitals game against the Jets. People were saying, Spencer Carberry said as much, as he was one of the few players on the Capitals on the ice that was actually able to keep pace with that Jets team that had a stranglehold over the Capitals. So, and again, he was a guy that kind of, his analytics, if we take a look at how he played in Hershey before he got called up, again, here, we're not the best, but, he is at least chipping in. He's getting contributions. He scored a goal. Does he have a set spot on this roster? Probably for the rest of the season, but there's also outlier things. Matthew Phillips is playing pretty good for the Hershey Bears as well. So could Ethen Frank mix into that? Could Pierre Dubé, could he fit into that mold? I guess we don't know, but it is a team that is gradually getting younger, and they're getting younger based on necessity. Does Ethen Frank fit into the Capitals' plans, their long-term plans, or is he just going to be an asset that will be on the move? Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. As you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview, coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Find it once again, March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. Check out, you're going to hear insights on the Nationals, all those things. So exciting. So check that out. Available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.